Greetings, friends. Is the world really moving on from COVID? The politicians have changed their tune, restrictions are being loosened in a growing number of countries, and a crisis in the Ukraine allows the media to change the topic. Fear has always been fuel. It accomplishes things. It changes your behavior. It makes you malleable. Fear shuts up people from one another. It burns through people eventually and causes fatigue. But if people are allowed to regain their energy, their controllers can make them afraid again, and so on. We hear of the lifting of mandates, we hear of the lifting of restrictions, we see visible evidence of this. But how can we know that they won't bring back these things in the future? They even tell us that should conditions change, we'll have to go back to how things were. For example, Chief Public Health Officer of Canada, Theresa Tam, recently said something to this very same effect. Are you telling me that 2 years from now we won't have had any more vax passes or mask mandates? Will no employers require the injection? Will so-called private companies and municipal governments override the decisions at the provincial or federal level? And if not vax passes, then what about the requirement for testing? And if a positive test comes up, the requirement for self-isolation? I'm talking mainly in the context of travel, but this could be employment, this could be going on a field trip, who knows? You're telling me that this testing, this requirements for self-isolation won't be a thing over the next 2 years? And I'm being generous in saying just 2 years, because we should be thinking about this decade, what's coming. What about travel by train or travel by plane? Are you telling me that 2 years from now, there will have been no more injection requirements to travel internationally on a plane? There won't happen anymore in the next 2 years? I don't know, man. Are you so confident of that? Will I be able to visit my grandpa over the next 2 years inside his building? Or will I have to continue sitting outside with him? Because that's how it is right now. Places like this, retirement homes, are going to be very slow to let go of these sorts of restrictions. And it's not hard for me to imagine that they won't let me into his building anytime soon, if at all. Do you think people are going to just stop wearing masks and that 2 years from now nobody is going to be wearing them? For many people, it's a way for them to signal their tribe. For others, it's fashionable. A lot of people don't like the mask, but a large number are neutral. I see factory workers going home, and they're still wearing their mask outside, even though they've been wearing the mask all day. They could be in their 20s to their 60s in age. It doesn't matter. They could be wearing a mask outside. Still. What assurance do we have that if the powers that be changed their position, then we'd be back to all of these things in a heartbeat? Do you think people are so tired of COVID? A lot of them are. Perhaps a crucial mass of them are. But there are also many people who have adopted the COVIDian religion. They share the fear. Maybe adjacent to them are those who are just broken in. Many people were just broken in. They were made more malleable. Now, they wouldn't even deserve to not have the restrictions imposed on them again. They wouldn't even deserve that. They don't even deserve that. Frankly, most of us don't even deserve that. But there is this group of the COVIDian religion, which are all those who share the fear. The fear is widespread. It cuts across all age categories, groups of people. The fear is a kind of faith, and that holds the cult together. They believe that being around your loved ones can kill them. And they are obsessed with death at the same time. And they are so afraid, even afraid of their own children. Imagine putting a mask on young children. Imagine parents doing that to young children 5 years old or less than that. What kind of madness do I even call that? If large numbers of people are capable of doing that, putting masks on small children, they're kids, If that is the case, and from what I've seen, large numbers of people are indeed capable of doing this, then why wouldn't these same people go back into pandemic mode at an instant? Some of them got a sense of purpose, got some power out of it, but I think the truth is that the mass of people just obey. There's been this talk of mass formation psychosis, which is simply not true. It's the idea that at a time when the culture was searching for meaning and anxious, they were all focused on one event that craftily put them in a hypnotized state or psychotic state. It's a psychological idea. And it's not true. It's a liberal cope because most people just obey. And they weren't walking around in a state of psychosis. So the idea that people talk about mass formation psychosis, well, first of all, it's silly because that was already known as herd mentality. But to psychologize it all is just a liberal cope because we're living in a dying liberal age, but that's another point. So how has the behavior of humans over the last 2 years indicated that we will not submit to such impositions on our lives? To the contrary, the majority of us willingly submitted. Many of us even believed wholeheartedly. And not only are all the politicians and corporate leaders who did this to us still in power, we talk about how nice it would be if Pierre Poilievre became Prime Minister of Canada. Why on earth would the elites let us have our freedoms back? They've made such incredible gains, and we've performed so well for them, perhaps beyond their expectations, that to let all of these things back to the way they were just wouldn't make sense from their perspective of the game they're playing. They openly discuss their plans for humanity, which go much, much further and much, much darker than even what they have unleashed since 2020. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney has ended the mask mandate in Alberta, and as far as I know, they've also ended vax passes there. And he's made a law requiring municipalities to avoid from enforcing such requirements as masks and vaxes on their citizens. And I'd say that's good. However, who is to say that in the future the government won't use the same law to make municipalities do the bad things that they've been doing the past 2 years? Jason Kenney is responsible for overseeing the imposition of this mad cult in his own province. The Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, has also changed his tune. Though Ontario lags behind the Western provinces in loosening restrictions, I feel like Toronto is one of the worst places to live in the sense that it's just lags. Every sort of bad, liberal, woke, or globalist trend will always finish last. Maybe it will be adopted early on in Toronto, of course, and it will be abandoned like one of the last places in the world. Any sort of horrible trend of our time adopted in Toronto early on, and we will hold on to the bitter end. It's just so sad. When we think of Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario, this guy might be saying stuff that makes sense recently about, no one wants to wear masks, he was saying. Then oh well, Doug, then you've been a total idiot for 2 years. You've been doing something you hate doing. You know that it's stupid. He didn't say it in those words, but he's talking some truth. But this guy is a traitor. I mean, he's avoided the truth for 2 years. He disparaged people who were trying to talk truth. And now we see these men, Kenney and Ford, talking sense to you. Well, I don't know if that should even be relieving to you, or maybe in some sense, but in another sense, it should make you furious. I mean, these are cowards. These are men who went along with bad things, horrible things, and they participated in the cult, and they made the cult continue thereby. How many families were broken apart because of the actions of these men? Now let's think beyond the next 2 years to the rest of the 2020s. I don't believe the world is moving on from pandemic scares, moving on from authoritarian impositions. They might not always make it about viruses, although I think they will continue to use viruses, but it could be something else. There could be lockdowns for other reasons than viruses. Just imagine at all the race war stuff that's coming, and any sort of, maybe they'll reignite a terrorism scare. Only it won't be Islamic people anymore. So I don't believe that we're really moving on from. We might be moving on from COVID, but I don't think we're moving on from lockdowns, masks. We're seeing a lessening in lockdowns and masks. Are we moving on from vax passes? I'm even less optimistic about that because that's tied into their whole hopes for the social credit score. We're moving towards some system like that. Definitely more increased surveillance and being tied into this grid, this game, this whatever you want to call it. They may pivot back to climate change, but viruses will remain in the public consciousness, I think. And I'd love to be wrong about all of this. I will be happy if I am wrong. Being wrong about all of this would be welcome for me. Hasta luego, amigos.